My name is Dahlia Martin. I'm 28 years old. 3 hours ago, my father stood in front of 150 guests at my sister's engagement party and called me a failure, in those exact words. The champagne was flowing, the crystal chandeliers were sparkling, and my father, Dr. Richard Martin, retired cardiologist and patriarch of our proud medical legacy, raised his glass and delivered a toast that still burns in my chest. To my successful daughter who's marrying a doctor, unlike her sister, who chose a simple life teaching children their ABCs. The laughter that followed cut deeper than any surgery he ever performed. What my father didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the quiet man sitting beside me, the one Dad barely acknowledged when we walked in, was about to change everything. A single check, a single revelation. And suddenly, my sister's 3-carat engagement ring didn't seem so impressive anymore. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To the morning I almost didn't go to that party at all. The morning of Vivian's engagement party, I woke up in my one-bedroom apartment with a knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed at 7. Ethan. Hey, his voice came through warm and steady. You okay? Today's the big day. I stared at the ceiling, at the tiny water stain I kept meaning to fix. Define okay. Fair enough. I could hear him smile through the phone. Want me to pick you up early? We can grab coffee, decompress before the firing squad. That's what I loved about Ethan. He didn't pretend my family was normal. He'd met them once, at a painfully awkward dinner 6 months ago, and he understood. We'd met 18 months earlier at a fundraiser for Chicago Public Schools. I was there representing Lincoln Elementary. He was there because, as he put it, I believe in education. He wore jeans and a simple blue button-down while everyone else was in suits. He helped me stack chairs afterward. I never asked what he did for work beyond healthcare administration. He never volunteered details. It wasn't what drew us together. When you spend your whole life being measured by career achievements, you learn to appreciate someone who asks about your day instead of your salary. I'll be there at noon, he said. And Dahlia, whatever happens today, you don't owe them anything. His Tesla pulled up at exactly 12. I noticed, not for the first time, that it was a nice car, Model S, sleek and silent. But Ethan drove it like any other vehicle. No pride, no showing off, just transportation. As I slid into the passenger seat, his phone rang through the car's speakers. He glanced at the screen and declined the call, but not before I caught a fragment. Board meeting Monday. Work stuff, he said, pulling away from the curb. Nothing that can't wait. I didn't think twice about it. The drive to Lakewood Country Club took 45 minutes. Plenty of time to explain the Martin family dynamics to someone who'd only glimpsed the surface. My father is Dr. Richard Martin, I began, watching the suburbs blur past. Retired cardiologist, 32 years at Northwestern Memorial. In our family, medicine isn't just a career, it's a religion. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, listening. My mother was a nurse before she retired. My sister Vivian is a nurse at one of the big private hospitals. And then there's me. I let out a small laugh that held no humor. The black sheep who chose to teach first grade instead of following the sacred path. When did it start? The comparison? As long as I can remember. I turned to face the window. When Vivian got into nursing school, Dad threw her a party. When I got my acceptance letter from the education program at UIC, he told me I was wasting my potential. I still remember that day. I was 18, clutching the letter like it was made of gold. My father took it from my hands, read it once, and tore it in half. Teaching? He'd said. You could be saving lives, and you want to teach children to count to 10? The pieces of that letter stayed in my trash can for a week before I finally threw them away. There's something else, I said quietly. Dad hasn't called me by my name in 3 years. When he talks about me to Vivian, he just says, your sister, like I'm not even worth naming. Ethan's hand found mine on the center console. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some wounds don't need words. They just need someone to acknowledge they exist. Lakewood Country Club announced itself before we even reached the entrance. 18 holes of emerald green golf course stretched toward the horizon. The main building rose like a temple to old money. White columns, marble steps, valets in crisp uniforms waiting to take our keys. I smoothed down my dress, navy blue, borrowed from my colleague Rachel, because I couldn't justify spending $200 on something I'd wear once. It was elegant enough, I told myself. No one would notice it wasn't designer. The moment we stepped inside, I knew I was wrong. The foyer gleamed with Italian marble. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Waitstaff in white jackets circulated with trays of Moet and Chandon, and the floral arrangements, Juliet roses, I recognized, the kind that cost $300 a bunch, perfumed the air with obscene luxury. And there, at the center of it all, stood my sister. Vivian wore Vera Wang, ivory silk that caught the light with every movement. Her engagement ring, 3 carats of princess-cut diamond, sparkled like it had its own spotlight. Our father stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the picture of paternal pride, the golden child and her throne. When they saw us approach, Vivian's smile shifted. It was subtle, most people wouldn't catch it, but I'd spent a lifetime learning to read my sister's expressions. That wasn't warmth. That was assessment. "Oh," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear. "You actually came." Her eyes traveled over my borrowed dress, my simple pearl studs, before landing on Ethan. "And you brought him." The pause was deliberate, dismissive, like she couldn't quite remember why she should bother learning his name. I felt Ethan's hand press gently against the small of my back. Steady, grounding. This was going to be a long night. My father's greeting set the tone for everything that followed. "Dahlia," he said, not warmly, just acknowledging my physical presence. Then his eyes flicked to Ethan. A handshake that lasted exactly 1 second. "And you are?" "Ethan Caldwell." Ethan's voice remained pleasant, unbothered. Dad was already turning away. "Vivian, come. The Hendersons just arrived. Dr. Henderson specifically asked to meet Derek." And just like that, we were dismissed. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my father parade Derek Collins through the crowd like a prized racehorse. Derek was handsome in that conventional way. Tall, square-jawed, the kind of man who looked born to wear a white coat. An orthopedic surgeon at 34. Exactly the son-in-law Richard Martin had always dreamed of. "My future son-in-law," Dad announced to a cluster of his former colleagues, "performs over 200 surgeries a year at Caldwell General, one of the top orthopedic programs in the Midwest." Caldwell General. The name registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but I was too focused on my own invisibility to examine it. Mom found me by the hors d'oeuvres table. Patricia Martin had perfected the art of the apologetic glance. A lifetime of smoothing over her husband's sharp edges had trained her well. She squeezed my hand briefly, her eyes saying what her mouth couldn't. "I'm sorry. You know how he is." But she didn't speak up. She never did. "Your dress is lovely, dear," she whispered, before drifting back to my father's orbit. Ethan appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "You okay?" "Surviving." I took a long sip. "That's Derek, by the way, the surgeon, the one marrying Vivian." I gathered. His expression was unreadable. "Which hospital did your father say he works at?" "Caldwell General. Why?" Ethan just smiled. "No reason. Vivian found me alone." Ethan had stepped away to take a call, something about quarterly projections that he apologized for, and my sister materialized like she'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. "Little sister." She hooked her arm through mine in a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance. Up close, her grip was iron. "Let's chat." She steered me toward a quiet corner near the French doors, away from the other guests. The smile never left her face. Still teaching ABCs? Her voice dripped with sweetness and something sharper underneath. That's sweet. Really. Someone has to do the simple jobs, right? I kept my expression neutral. Years of practice. I love my work. Of course you do. She patted my arm. Not everyone can handle the pressure of a real career. It's good that you found something manageable. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that she would hear. Her attention shifted. So, your boyfriend, Ethan? She pronounced his name like she was trying to remember something vaguely unpleasant. What does he do again? Accounting? IT? Healthcare. Vivian's perfectly microbladed eyebrows rose. Healthcare? So, what, like a nurse? A small laugh. Like me, but without the prestige hospital? Something like that. Hmm. She glanced across the room to where Derek stood shaking hands with another surgeon. It's a shame, really. I always thought you'd end up alone. At least you found someone, even if he's... She trailed off, letting the silence fill in the insult. I thought about defending Ethan, explaining that his work was more significant than she could imagine. But then I realized I didn't actually know the full scope of what he did. I'd never asked for specifics, and I didn't need to justify him to Vivian anyway. Some people don't deserve explanations. Derek approached us with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Ladies, he slid an arm around Vivian's waist, every inch the devoted fiancé. Then, almost as an afterthought, Dahlia, good to see you. Congratulations on the engagement. Thanks. He barely registered the words before launching into his favorite subject, himself. Big changes at the hospital lately. Keeps me on my toes. Vivian beamed. Derek's been handling 3 extra surgeries a week since the restructuring. The whole system got bought out a couple years back, Derek continued, clearly enjoying the audience. Some big medical group swooped in. Caldwell Medical Group, I think? 4 hospitals now. Major expansion. I felt something shift in my chest. A puzzle piece I hadn't known was missing. The new owner's some young guy, Derek said, sipping his scotch. Never met him myself. He runs everything remotely, board meetings, acquisitions, the whole operation. Probably some old money heir playing CEO, you know the type. Caldwell. I looked across the room. Ethan had finished his call and was walking back toward me, his phone sliding into the pocket of his suit jacket. Caldwell. His last name was Caldwell. The same name on Derek's hospital. You okay? Derek asked, noticing my expression. You look like you've seen a ghost. Fine, I managed. Just remembered something. Ethan reached us then, his hand finding its natural place at the small of my back. What did I miss? Just work talk, Derek said dismissively. The usual hospital politics. You wouldn't understand, it's a medical thing. Ethan nodded politely. I'm sure. His voice was perfectly casual, but his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, met mine. And I knew. Somehow I knew. I pulled Ethan onto the terrace the moment I could. The night air was cool against my flushed cheeks. String lights wound through the pergola, casting soft shadows across his face. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses continued without us. Caldwell Medical Group, I said quietly. That's you, isn't it? He didn't deny it. Didn't deflect. Yes. The single word hung between us. You own Derek's hospital. I own 4 hospitals. Derek works at one of them. Ethan's voice was steady, but I saw something vulnerable flash across his features. I've never met him personally. He's not senior enough to warrant direct contact with ownership. I processed this slowly. 18 months together. Conversations about books, about dreams, about what makes a good pizza. Never once about the scope of his work. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to know me. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. Not the company, not the hospitals. Me, the guy who stacks chairs at fundraisers. I thought about all the times money had defined relationships in my family, how my father measured worth in salary brackets and prestige. How Vivian flaunted Derek's surgeon title like a designer bag. Ethan had given me the opposite. I was going to tell you when the time was right, he continued. I never wanted you to think I was hiding anything. He exhaled. I didn't want to be dated for my bank account. I never asked what you earned. Exactly. A small smile. That's exactly why I fell for you. The terrace door opened behind us, a server checking on something, then closed again. I brought documentation, Ethan said softly. A check. Just in case your family needed to see proof. Proof of what? That you chose someone worthy of you, even by their standards. We returned to the party just as the MC stepped onto the small stage. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The crowd gradually quieted, champagne flutes pausing mid-sip. Waitstaff froze in place. Even the ambient jazz faded to silence. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Richard Martin, father of our beautiful bride-to-be, who would like to say a few words. Applause rippled through the room as my father took the microphone, gold-plated. Of course. He stood before a backdrop of white roses, $5,000 worth, if I had to guess, with the confidence of a man who'd commanded operating rooms for 3 decades. The spotlight loved him. 150 guests turned their attention forward. Surgeons, lawyers, country club members, the who's who of Chicago's medical elite. I spotted several phones already recording. My stomach twisted. I knew that look on my father's face, that particular combination of pride and performance. He was about to deliver a speech, and I was about to become collateral damage. Please, I whispered to no one, please just let this be about Vivian. Ethan's fingers intertwined with mine under the tablecloth. Dad cleared his throat, surveying his audience like a conductor before the symphony. Tonight, he began, his baritone filling the room. I want to celebrate the daughter who has made me proud, the daughter who understood that the Martin name means something, the daughter who chose excellence. He raised his crystal flute toward Vivian, who stood glowing in her Vera Wang. To Vivian and her brilliant fiancé, Dr. Derek Collins. I held my breath. Maybe, I thought, maybe he'll stop there. But then his eyes found me in the crowd, and he smiled. Vivian has always understood what it means to be a Martin, my father continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. She followed in her mother's footsteps, became a nurse, and now she's marrying a surgeon, a man who saves lives every single day. Murmurs of approval. Vivian's smile stretched impossibly wider. Dad raised his glass higher. This family has a legacy. 3 generations of medical professionals, healers, people who matter. And tonight, that legacy continues through my daughter, my successful daughter, who is marrying into excellence. He paused. The timing was theatrical, deliberate, and then he looked directly at me, unlike her sister. The words landed like stones in still water. I felt the ripples reach every table. Dahlia chose a different path. His smile carried an edge of pity. She decided that teaching children to write their ABCs was more important than saving lives. A simple life, she calls it, and I suppose we must respect that, even if we don't understand it. Laughter scattered through the room. Not kind laughter, the kind that comes at someone's expense. Vivian covered her mouth, her eyes dancing with barely concealed glee. Derek looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Mom stared at her plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. So tonight, let's raise our glasses to the daughter who got it right. Dad's voice boomed. To Vivian and Derek, the future of the Martin legacy. May you build a family that makes us all proud. To Vivian and Derek, the toast echoed. Crystal clinked. Everyone drank. Everyone except me. I sat frozen, face burning, feeling 150 pairs of eyes glance my way, with expressions ranging from pity to amusement to outright contempt. The laughter hit like shrapnel, scattered, sharp, impossible to dodge. 28 years of being the lesser daughter, 28 years of being compared and found wanting. I should have been used to it by now. I wasn't. Ethan's hand tightened around mine, and something inside me finally, irreversibly broke. The moment stretched like taffy. I could feel every heartbeat, every breath, the champagne bubbles fizzing in glasses around me, the rustle of expensive fabric, the whispers already beginning. Poor thing, so embarrassing. Imagine having your own father. One woman at the next table caught my eye and quickly looked away. Her expression caught somewhere between sympathy and satisfaction that it wasn't her being humiliated. Mom finally looked up from her plate. The apology in her eyes was profound and utterly useless. I considered my options. I could excuse myself to the bathroom and cry quietly where no one could see. I could smile and pretend it didn't hurt, the way I'd done at every family gathering for the past decade. I could simply leave, disappear into the night, confirm every assumption they'd already made about me. That's what the old Dahlia would have done. Absorb the blow, swallow the pain, wait for it to fade. But then Ethan leaned close, his lips brushing my ear. "Say the word," he whispered, "and I'll end this. Your call." Your call. Not his decision. Mine. For the first time in my life, I had a choice. Real power. Not to escape, but to respond. I thought about my students, 22 first graders who looked up at me every day, learning that they had voices worth using, that they mattered. When had I stopped believing that about myself? The room was still buzzing with post-toast chatter. Dad was accepting handshakes, basking in the glow of his own words. Vivian was showing off her ring to a cluster of admirers. No one expected anything from me. That was their first mistake. I squeezed Ethan's hand once, a signal. Then I rose to my feet. Let me pause here for a moment. I'm curious. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who was supposed to love you? Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if you're wondering what Ethan whispered to me, what I decided to do next, and whose face turned the palest in that room, you'll want to stay until the end. But first, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. Now back to the country club. When I stood, everyone assumed I was leaving. I saw it in their faces, the knowing nods, the pitying glances. There she goes. Can't handle the truth. One man actually started to clap, thinking I was offering a gracious exit. Vivian smirked from across the room, victory already written in her posture. "Poor thing," someone murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "Must be hard being the family disappointment." I almost faltered. Almost. Years of conditioning screamed at me to sit back down, to smooth my dress and pretend nothing had happened, to be the good, invisible daughter who never caused a scene. The old Dahlia would have walked toward the exit. She would have collected her coat, smiled politely at the valet, and cried the entire drive home. But I wasn't walking toward the door. I was walking toward the stage. The microphone was still in my father's hand. He noticed my approach and his smile flickered, just for a moment, with something like surprise. "Dahlia?" His voice carried through the speakers. "Is something wrong?" The room fell quiet again. Different this time. Curious. I stopped 3 feet from my father, acutely aware of every camera phone being raised, every ear straining to catch whatever came next. "Actually, Dad," I said, and my voice didn't shake, not even a little. "I'd like to say something." His eyebrows rose. "Now isn't really the time. Now is exactly the time." Behind me, I felt rather than saw Ethan stand. His presence at my back was solid, reassuring, a promise. Dad's grip on the microphone tightened. He wasn't used to being interrupted, wasn't used to me, of all people, refusing to disappear. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did anyone else. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the ice melting in someone's drink. 150 people stared at me. Surgeons, lawyers, country club wives with diamonds at their throats. Every one of them wondering what the family disappointment could possibly have to say. My father's expression had shifted from surprise to something warier. He knew me as the quiet one, the daughter who took whatever he gave without complaint. This version of me, spine straight, eyes clear, was unfamiliar territory. "Do you have something to add?" he asked, the words dripping with condescension. A verbal pat on the head. "Humor her. She'll run out of steam." "Actually, I do." I reached out and gently, but firmly, took the microphone from his hand. He was too surprised to resist. "My boyfriend wanted to contribute to the wedding." A ripple of confusion through the crowd. Vivian's smirk faltered. "Ethan?" I turned slightly, gesturing for him to join me. He walked forward with the easy confidence of a man who'd addressed shareholders and board members and never once flinched. When he reached my side, he slipped his hand into his jacket and produced a leather checkbook. "How generous," Vivian said from her position by the roses. Her voice was thin, strained. "What, like a few $100s?" Someone laughed nervously. My father crossed his arms. "That's sweet, but really, this isn't—" "Please," I said calmly. "Let him finish." Ethan uncapped a pen. The Mont Blanc caught the light as he began to write, each stroke deliberate, unhurried. The room held its breath. When he finished, he tore the check free with a soft, decisive sound and handed it to me. I looked at the number. Then I looked at my father, and I smiled. The check felt substantial in my hand. Heavier than paper had any right to be. "Ethan wanted to help with the wedding," I said, my voice steady through the microphone. "He's writing a check." Vivian took a step forward, her Vera Wang rustling. "How thoughtful." The words were acid wrapped in silk. "I'm sure every little bit helps. $500? 1,000?" Some of her friends tittered. "Yes, quite generous," my father added, already reaching to reclaim the microphone. "We appreciate the gesture from your accountant friend." Accountant. The word dripped with dismissal. I held the microphone out of his reach. "Actually, the amount is a bit more than that." Ethan stood beside me, utterly still. He hadn't said a word since handing me the check. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Calm, assured, waiting. "Well?" Vivian's voice had taken on an edge. The uncertainty was starting to show. "What's the magic number? 2,000? Did your boyfriend empty his savings account for us?" More laughter. Less confident this time. I looked at the check again, at the neat handwriting, at the logo in the corner, discreet, professional, definitely not from any ordinary checking account. "The magic number," I said slowly, savoring each syllable, "is $250,000. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Vivian laughed, high and sharp and disbelieving. "That's a joke! That's obviously a joke!" I held up the check. The Chase Private Client logo was visible even from a distance. Beneath it, clearly printed, Caldwell Medical Group. Derek's champagne glass slipped in his grip, and my father's face went the color of old ash. The silence was deafening. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, trays suspended midair, eyes fixed on the check in my hand. "That's not possible," Vivian breathed. Her voice had lost all its edges. That can't be real." I held the check higher, angling it toward the chandelier light so everyone could see. The numbers were unmistakable. 250, 000.00, $250,000. Whispers erupted like brushfire. Phones emerged from pockets and purses. Somewhere in the crowd I heard someone say, "Did she say Caldwell Medical Group?" Derek had gone pale. The casual arrogance of earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked very much like dawning horror. "Wait," his voice cracked. "Wait, Caldwell? As in Caldwell Medical Group?" I turned to face him directly. "Yes, Derek, exactly like Caldwell Medical Group. That's—" He swallowed hard. That's where I work. That's my hospital. Is it? Vivian grabbed Derek's arm. What are you talking about? What does Dahlia's boyfriend have to do with your hospital? But Derek wasn't looking at his fiancé. He was looking at Ethan, really looking at him for the first time all evening. Recognition and terror warred across his features. Who are you? Derek's voice came out strangled. Who the hell are you? Ethan smiled. It was a pleasant expression, almost friendly. I think, he said calmly, it's time for a proper introduction. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once in his life, Dr. Richard Martin had no clever remarks, no cutting observations. He simply stood there, champagne forgotten in his hand, watching everything he thought he knew crumble around him. This was only the beginning. Derek's face had taken on a grayish hue. Caldwell Medical Group, he repeated, more to himself than anyone else. The new ownership, the acquisition 2 years ago. His eyes darted between the check and Ethan's calm expression. They said the owner was young, that he ran everything remotely, that nobody had ever actually met him. The words died in his throat. Vivian's grip on his arm tightened. Derek, what are you saying? What's going on? The owner, Derek whispered. The guy everyone talks about but nobody's ever seen. The one who bought all 4 hospitals. He looked at Ethan with something approaching vertigo. That's you, isn't it? Ethan inclined his head slightly. Guilty. The murmur that swept through the room was like a wave. I watched it ripple from table to table, confusion transforming into shock, transforming into something else. Recalculation, reassessment, the boring accountant boyfriend. The man my father couldn't be bothered to remember. The nobody who helped stack chairs at charity events. Owner of 4 hospitals. Derek's boss. My father's champagne glass trembled. Just a fraction. That's impossible, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. Derek, tell me that's impossible. Derek didn't answer. He couldn't. Because even now, even in the midst of his mounting panic, the surgeon in him was putting together the pieces. The Tesla, the phone calls about board meetings, the quiet confidence of a man who never felt the need to prove anything to anyone. It all fit. It had been right in front of them the whole time, and they'd dismissed him as nothing. I watched my father's face as the realization crystallized. The great Dr. Richard Martin, who measured human worth by resume and bank balance, had spent the evening condescending to a man who could buy his entire legacy 10 times over. The irony was delicious. I raised the microphone one final time. Everyone, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos of whispers and gasps, I'd like to properly introduce my boyfriend. The room fell silent. Even the string quartet in the corner had abandoned their instruments. I turned to look at Ethan. Really look at him. The man I'd fallen for at a school fundraiser. The man who'd never once made me feel small. Who'd spent 18 months letting me love him for exactly who he was, not what he owned. This is Ethan Caldwell, I said clearly. CEO and owner of Caldwell Medical Group. A collective intake of breath. 4 private hospitals across the Midwest, including... I paused, letting my gaze drift to Derek. The one Derek works at. Derek looked like he might be sick. So, technically, I continued, allowing myself the smallest of smiles, my boyfriend is Derek's boss. The hospital owner. The one nobody had ever met. The phones were out in full force now. Not to mock me this time. To document. Tomorrow this would be the talk of the country club. The hospital. Every social circle my father had carefully cultivated over 30 years. I turned to face my father directly. So, Dad, I said, I guess teaching children their ABCs wasn't such a waste after all. It certainly didn't stop me from meeting someone successful. I let that word hang in the air. By your definition, anyway. My father's jaw worked. No sound came out. The $250,000 is Ethan's gift to Vivian's wedding, I continued. Not because he needs to prove anything, but because he's generous, kind. The kind of person who helps people without expecting recognition. I handed the microphone back to my father. He took it automatically, still speechless. Those, I said quietly, just for him, are qualities you can't measure on a resume, but you might want to start trying. The silence that followed felt like vindication. The reactions cascaded across the room like dominoes falling. Derek stood frozen, the color draining from his face in real time. He'd spent the evening dismissing the quiet boyfriend as a nobody, and now that nobody signed his paychecks, his surgical hands, so steady in the operating room, trembled visibly at his sides. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Her 3-carat engagement ring, which had seemed so impressive all evening, suddenly looked small, insignificant, a trinket compared to the power she'd failed to recognize. I didn't. We didn't. She couldn't complete a sentence. At the table nearest the stage, a woman I recognized as the hospital's chief of surgery leaned toward her husband and whispered something. Phones were being put away now, not because the story was over, but because the owners of those phones were recalculating their relationships with my family in real time, and my mother. For the first time in decades, Patricia Martin was smiling, not her usual apologetic, placating smile, something genuine, something almost triumphant. She caught my eye across the room and nodded, just once, an acknowledgement that somehow felt like a blessing. The guests who had laughed at my father's toast suddenly found their champagne extremely interesting. No one was making eye contact with Dad. The social capital he'd spent 30 years accumulating was evaporating by the second. Well, someone said loudly into the silence, one of Dad's former colleagues, gray-haired and distinguished. This is quite an evening. Murmurs of agreement, nervous laughter, the particular sound of an entire room re-evaluating their assumptions. My father still hadn't spoken. His champagne glass hung forgotten in his grip, catching the light from the chandelier that had been arranged to make his family look perfect. Nothing looked perfect anymore. It just looked true. Movement at the edge of the crowd caught my attention. A man in his mid-40s stepped forward, salt and pepper hair, impeccably tailored suit, the kind of quiet authority that came from years in executive boardrooms. I didn't recognize him, but something about his bearing suggested importance. He approached the stage with measured steps, then stopped beside Ethan. "Pardon the interruption," his voice carried easily across the room. "I'm Marcus Webb, CFO of Caldwell Medical Group." A fresh wave of murmurs. "I was invited tonight as a guest of the Hendersons, old golfing partners." He nodded toward a couple near the back. "But given the circumstances, I feel compelled to offer some clarification." He turned to face the crowd directly. "I can confirm that Ethan Caldwell is indeed the CEO and sole owner of Caldwell Medical Group. I've worked with him for the past 4 years." His gaze found Derek in the crowd. "And yes, Dr. Collins, Caldwell General, where you perform your surgeries, is one of our facilities." Derek made a small, strangled sound. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a business card, which he extended toward Derek with professional courtesy. "We haven't formally met, but I believe we have a board meeting scheduled for next month. I look forward to it." The business card gleamed in the chandelier light, embossed, heavyweight stock, the Caldwell Medical Group logo prominently displayed. Derek took it with shaking fingers. "Thank you, Marcus," Ethan said quietly. "Of course." The CFO inclined his head. "Though I must say, I've been to a lot of corporate events. This is the most entertaining one yet." A few people actually laughed at that, genuine laughter, breaking some of the tension. But for my father, still clutching his microphone, the confirmation had changed nothing. The damage was already done. My father found his voice at last. "Well," the word came out too loud, too bright. "This is wonderful news. What a remarkable young man." He stepped toward Ethan, hand extended, smile stretching across his face with the elasticity of a man who'd spent decades mastering social recovery. "Ethan, I must apologize. We didn't have a proper chance to talk earlier. Richard Martin, retired cardiology, Northwestern Memorial." He pumped Ethan's hand vigorously. "We're so proud, so very proud of Dahlia. Always have been." The lie was so transparent it was almost impressive. I watched faces around the room react, raised eyebrows, shared glances. The particular expression of people who had witnessed something shameful and were now watching the perpetrator attempt damage control. No one was fooled. Proud? I repeated softly. Dad's smile flickered. You just stood in front of 150 people and called my career a simple life. You compared me unfavorably to Vivian. Again. You said I chose to teach ABCs instead of saving lives. The room had gone quiet again. Well, Dad's composure was cracking. That was just a joke. You know how these toasts are. A bit of family humor. No one was laughing with me, Dad. They were laughing at me because you told them to. His mouth opened, closed. The hand still gripping the microphone trembled slightly. You didn't know Ethan owned hospitals, I continued, my voice level. You didn't care who he was because you assumed he wasn't worth knowing, just like you've always assumed I wasn't worth respecting. The silence stretched. That changes now, I said. Or it doesn't. Either way, I'm done pretending. My father looked around the room, searching for an ally. He found none. I took a breath. Then I set down the microphone. This next part wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't for the cameras or the social media posts that would inevitably follow. It was for my father. And for me. Dad, I said, stepping closer so only he could hear. I love my job. I love teaching children to read, to believe in themselves, to know that their voices matter. He said nothing. His face was unreadable. I don't need your approval anymore. I stopped needing that years ago. I met his eyes steadily. But I do need your respect. And if that's too much to ask, if you genuinely can't see value in who I am without a medical degree or a wealthy husband, then this is the last family event I'll attend. The words hung between us. I'm not asking for your blessing, I continued. I'm telling you my terms. You can accept them or not, but I won't spend another decade being your disappointment. My father's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, or shame, or the particular discomfort of a man who'd never been spoken to this way by his own daughter. Dahlia. That's it. I stepped back. That's all I have to say. I turned and walked back to Ethan's side. His hand found mine immediately, solid and warm. Behind me, I heard the silence stretching. My father, for the first time in 62 years, had absolutely nothing to say, and somehow, that was the most satisfying sound of all. Pause for a moment and let me ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you forgive your father, or would you walk away? Comment below with your choice. I'd love to know. And if you want to see how my family reacted in the days that followed, keep watching. Don't forget to like this video if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their profession. Vivian caught up with me on the terrace. The party behind us was slowly resuming. Awkward conversations, forced laughter, the particular sound of people pretending nothing extraordinary had just happened. But my sister had abandoned her post by the roses and followed me out into the night air. Dahlia, wait! I turned. For once, there was no smirk on Vivian's face, no condescension. She looked rattled, uncertain, like someone had rearranged the furniture in a room she'd memorized. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. Why didn't you tell us about Ethan, about who he really was? I considered the question carefully. Would it have mattered? Vivian blinked. What? If Ethan really was just an accountant, I said slowly, if he earned $50,000 a year and drove a Honda, would you have treated me any differently? She opened her mouth, closed it. Would you have stopped comparing us? Would Dad have stopped making me the punchline of every family joke? I shook my head. The answer is no, Vivian. You know it as well as I do. Her eyes glistened. I couldn't tell if it was the champagne or something more genuine. That's not... She swallowed. I never meant... You've spent our entire lives making sure everyone knew you were the successful one, the smart one, the one who got it right. I kept my voice even. And I let you, because fighting seemed pointless. Vivian was silent. I don't hate you, I said finally. But I need you to understand something. My value doesn't change based on who I'm dating. It never did. My sister stood in the glow of the terrace lights, her Vera Wang catching the breeze, and for once, she had no comeback at all. Derek found Ethan near the bar. I watched from a distance as the surgeon approached, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who'd suddenly realized he'd been insulting his boss's girlfriend all evening. Mr. Caldwell. Derek's voice had climbed an octave. Sir, I just wanted to. I had no idea. I never meant any disrespect. Ethan accepted a glass of water from the bartender, nodding politely. Dr. Collins. The things I said earlier, about your work, about Dahlia. Derek ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting its perfection. I'm so sorry. This is incredibly embarrassing. It is, Ethan agreed pleasantly. Derek flinched. But here's the thing. Ethan set down his glass. I don't mix personal matters with professional ones. Your position at Caldwell General is based on your surgical record, which I'm told is excellent. That hasn't changed. Relief flooded Derek's face. Thank you. Thank you so much. However, Derek froze. Consider this evening a reminder. Ethan's voice remained calm, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath. You never know who you're speaking to, or about. The way you treated Dahlia before you knew anything about me, that's worth examining. Derek nodded rapidly. Yes, absolutely. You're right. I should have. I mean, I will. Good, Ethan smiled. I look forward to seeing your quarterly numbers at the board meeting. Marcus says your department is doing well. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Derek retreated, still nodding, still apologizing under his breath. I suspected Vivian would be hearing about this conversation for the rest of the evening. Ethan caught my eye across the room and raised an eyebrow. Handled? I nodded slightly. Handled. But we both knew the most important conversations were yet to come. The check was still in my hand, $250,000. Enough to fund a lavish wedding, a honeymoon in Bora Bora, and still have change left over. Exactly the kind of gift that would cement Ethan's status in my family's eyes, proof that their lesser daughter had somehow stumbled into money. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at Vivian, who had followed Derek back inside and was watching me with something like apprehension. Then I looked at my father, still recovering in a corner, surrounded by guests who seemed more interested in avoiding him than offering comfort. This check, I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, won't be going toward the wedding. Vivian's face shifted. What do you mean? Ethan said. Ethan offered? I held up the check. And I'm choosing how to use his generosity. Ethan moved to my side. He hadn't asked what I was planning, he'd simply trusted me. That trust, more than any dollar amount, was what made him extraordinary. This money is going to the Chicago Public Schools Foundation, I announced. A donation in the Martin family name. Murmurs rippled outward. $250,000 for classroom resources, reading programs, and educational supplies, I continued. For children who are learning their ABCs. For the teachers who show up every day to make sure those kids believe in themselves. My father looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. So at least one thing with the Martin name on it, I said quietly, will actually help children learn. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked, not hostile, almost respectful. And somewhere in that room, I heard my mother begin to clap. Others slowly joined her. The applause died down, but something lingered in its wake. Movement at the edge of my vision. My mother stepping forward. Patricia Martin had spent 32 years in my father's shadow, smoothing his rough edges, apologizing for his barbs, choosing peace over confrontation. I'd stopped expecting her to intervene years ago, but now she was walking toward me, her pearl necklace trembling slightly against her throat, her hands clasped in front of her like she was about to deliver testimony. Dahlia, I waited. I owe you an apology. Her voice cracked on the words. One that's about 30 years overdue. The room had gone quiet again. Even Dad in his corner had looked up. I watched your father compare you to your sister your entire life, Mom continued. I saw how it hurt you, how it made you doubt yourself, how you stopped bringing friends home because you knew he'd find a way to make you the punchline. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now. She didn't bother to wipe them away. And I said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was really just failing you. Mom, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. You deserved better. You deserved a mother who stood up for you, who told your father to stop, who told Vivian, she glanced at my sister, who told both of them that your worth wasn't measured in degrees or dollars. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I saved this, she whispered, pressing it into my hands. The letter from UIC, the one he tore up. I taped it back together that night. I looked down at the acceptance letter I thought had been destroyed 18 years ago, and for the first time all evening I cried. The party dissolved faster than anyone expected. Guests began making their excuses. Early morning surgeries, babysitter deadlines, a sudden need to be anywhere else. The congratulations they offered Vivian felt perfunctory now, empty of the warmth they'd carried before. But it was the conversation between my father and Dr. Henderson that I couldn't help overhearing. That was harsh, Dick. Henderson was an old colleague, gray-haired and distinguished, one of the few men in the room Dad actually respected. Even for you. My father's face reddened. It was just a joke, Jim. You know how these things. I know what I heard. Henderson shook his head slowly. And so did everyone else. Your own daughter, Richard, in front of all these people. He walked away without another word. Others followed his lead. Polite nods replaced the hearty handshakes Dad usually received. The colleague who'd always laughed at his golf stories suddenly needed to check his phone. The surgeon who usually lingered to discuss investments was already gathering his wife's coat. The tide had turned, and my father knew it. I watched him scan the room, searching for the validation he'd always taken for granted, the social currency he'd spent decades accumulating, the respect he'd assumed was permanent. He found none of it. For the first time in his 62 years, Dr. Richard Martin was the one being judged, the one whispered about, the one whose behavior had made others uncomfortable enough to leave. I felt no pleasure in his humiliation, only a quiet sense of something that might have been justice. The difference between us was simple. I'd endured public shame because of who I was. He was enduring it because of what he'd done. And I suspected that distinction would haunt him for a very long time. The valet brought Ethan's car around at 10:30. The cool night air wrapped around us as we walked out of the country club, leaving behind the crystal chandeliers and the whispers and the weight of everything that had just happened. Above us, stars were beginning to emerge from the Chicago sky, faint but present. Ethan opened the passenger door for me. You okay? I slid into the leather seat, the acceptance letter still clutched in my hand. I'm better than okay, I said softly. I think I'm finally free. He smiled, really smiled, not the polite expression he'd worn throughout the evening, and closed the door gently before walking around to the driver's side. The Tesla pulled away silently, the country club shrinking in the mirror until it was just another building lit up against the darkness. I didn't expect the education donation, Ethan said after a while. Did you mind? Mind? He laughed softly. Dahlia, it was perfect. Better than anything I could have planned. We drove in comfortable silence for several minutes. The radio stayed off. We didn't need it. Thank you, I said eventually, for being there, for letting me handle it my way. It was always your moment. He glanced at me. I was just the checkbook. You were more than that. He reached over and took my hand. I know. The city lights began to appear as we left the suburbs behind. Street lamps and storefronts and the ordinary beauty of a world that kept moving regardless of country club drama. I'd walked into that party as the family disappointment. I was leaving as something else entirely. Not because of Ethan's money, not because of the revelation or the gasps, or my father's humiliation, but because I'd finally spoken my truth. And that was worth more than any check. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened my bedside drawer. Beneath the paperbacks and spare phone chargers, tucked into an old envelope, was a letter I'd kept for 6 years. Not the UIC acceptance letter, that one I'd thought lost. This one was different. Handwritten. Second grade penmanship. Purple crayon. Dear Miss Martin, thank you for teaching me to read. My mom says I was never going to learn, but you made me believe I could. Now I read books every night. You are the best teacher in the whole world. Love, Marcus Johnson. I traced the uneven letters with my fingertip. Marcus had come to me as a struggling 7-year-old, 2 grade levels behind, convinced he was stupid because that's what everyone had always told him. His previous teacher had given up. His mother was working 3 jobs and barely had time to help. But I hadn't given up. Day after day, we'd sat together after class. Phonics exercises, word games. Slowly, painstakingly, watching the letters transform from enemies into friends. The day he read his first full sentence, the cat sat on the mat. His face had lit up like sunrise. That's why I chose this life. Not because I couldn't handle real pressure, not because I wasn't smart enough for medicine, but because there was nothing more meaningful than watching a child discover that they were capable of things they'd been told were impossible. My father would never understand that. Maybe Vivian wouldn't either. But Marcus understood. And 22 other first graders in my current class understood. And that was enough. I pressed the letter to my chest, then carefully returned it to its envelope. Tomorrow, I'd go back to teaching ABCs. I couldn't wait. The call came exactly 1 week later. I was grading spelling tests when my phone buzzed. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in 3 years. Dad, not Dr. Richard Martin, not father, just Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. Dahlia. My name. He actually said my name. Dad. Silence on the line. The particular silence of a man who wasn't used to being uncertain. I've been thinking, he said finally. I set down my red pen. About what? More silence. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him in his study, surrounded by his medical textbooks and framed diplomas, grasping for words that had never come easily. About what you said. At the party. He cleared his throat. About respect. I waited. I may have been. A long pause. Too focused on one definition of success. My definition. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But for Richard Martin, it was close. I didn't. He stopped. Started again. When you chose teaching, I saw it as a rejection. Of me. Of everything I'd worked for. Everything I wanted to pass on. It wasn't about you, Dad. I know that now. His voice was rough. I think I always knew. I just didn't want to accept it. The spelling test sat forgotten on my desk. What made you call? I asked. Your mother. A slight laugh. She showed me that letter, the one she saved, and she told me some things I wasn't ready to hear. I could imagine that conversation. Patricia Martin finally finding her voice. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Dad said. I haven't earned that, but I wondered if we could talk, sometime, when you're ready. I looked out the window at the afternoon light. I'll think about it, I said. It was honest, and for now, it was enough. The Chicago Tribune ran the story on a Tuesday. 250,000 donation transforms public school resources. Largest private contribution in Chicago Public Schools Foundation history. The article featured a photo of the foundation's director accepting an oversized ceremonial check. In the corner, printed clearly for everyone to see. In honor of educators everywhere. The Martin family. I read the article 3 times over my morning coffee. The donation would fund new reading programs in 12 under-resourced schools, updated classroom libraries, technology grants for teachers who'd been buying supplies out of their own pockets for years. The superintendent had sent a personal email. Dear Ms. Martin, on behalf of the 340,000 students in Chicago public schools, thank you. Your generosity will impact countless young readers for years to come. We would be honored to have you speak at our annual Educator Recognition Ceremony next spring. I screenshot the email and sent it to Ethan. His response came immediately. You deserve all of it. At Lincoln Elementary, the news had spread through the teacher's lounge like wildfire. Rachel, whose dress I'd borrowed for the party, had actually hugged me in the hallway. $250,000, she kept repeating. For public schools. Dahlia, you're a hero. I wasn't a hero. I was just a first-grade teacher who'd had enough of being dismissed. But there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the Martin name attached to education instead of medicine. About knowing that my father would have to explain to his country club friends why his family's biggest public contribution went to classroom resources. Not surgical wings. Not endowed chairs at Northwestern. ABCs. The simple things. The things that actually changed lives. Vivian called on a Sunday afternoon. I was pruning the small collection of succulents on my windowsill when her name appeared on my screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I remembered the look on her face at the country club, the uncertainty that had replaced her usual confidence, and I answered. Dahlia. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? I sat down. I'm listening. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush. For everything. For the ABC's comments. For the jokes. For 30 years of making you feel like you weren't enough. I said nothing. Let her continue. I was jealous. She laughed bitterly. How pathetic is that? I was jealous of my little sister because you always seemed so content, so sure of yourself, like you didn't need anyone's approval. That's what jealousy looked like to you? Contentment? I know. It's ridiculous. I was so busy chasing Dad's praise that I couldn't understand why you didn't want it too. Why you could just be happy. The afternoon light shifted across my apartment. I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight, Vivian continued. I know that's not how it works, but I want to try, to be better, to be the sister I should have been all along. I thought about Marcus's letter, about my students, about all the people who'd shown me that change was possible when someone truly committed to it. I hear you, Vivian. I chose my words carefully. And I appreciate you saying this, but I need to see change, not just hear about it. Actions matter more than apologies. I understand. Her voice wavered. I'll prove it, however long it takes. Then we'll see. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open. Monday morning arrived the way Monday mornings always do. I stood at the front of my classroom at Lincoln Elementary, dry erase marker in hand, watching 22 first graders settle into their small plastic chairs. The walls were covered with their artwork, painted handprints, construction paper caterpillars, attempts at writing the alphabet that made my heart swell. No crystal chandeliers here, no champagne, no Vera Wang, just crayons, and curiosity, and the most important work I could imagine. Good morning, everyone. I capped the marker. Ready to learn some new words today? 22 faces looked up at me, some still sleepy, some wiggling with energy, all of them trusting me to help them grow. Today we're going to learn about the letter Q, I announced, and smiled at the chorus of groans. I know, Q is tricky, but you know what? Tricky things are usually worth figuring out. A small hand shot up, Lily, with her perpetually untied shoelaces. Miss Martin, is it true you're a millionaire now? Kids hear everything. I made a mental note to send a gentle reminder to the teacher's lounge about private conversations. No, sweetie, I'm not a millionaire. I knelt to her level. But even if I were, I'd still be right here, teaching you. Why? I thought about the question. about country clubs and champagne toasts and fathers who measured worth in dollars. Because this, I said, gesturing around the room, is where I belong. This is my happy place. Lily considered this seriously. I like your happy place, Miss Martin. Me too, Lily. I retied her shoelaces. Me too. I returned to the whiteboard, marker in hand, ready to tackle the letter Q. This was my simple life, and it was everything. Ethan was waiting for me after school. He leaned against his Tesla in the parking lot, casual in jeans and a sweater, looking nothing like the CEO of a 4-hospital medical group. A few teachers walking past did double takes, but he didn't seem to notice. How was Q Day? I laughed, falling into step beside him. Challenging. We're still working on the concept that Q is almost always followed by U. Several students remain unconvinced. I support their skepticism. English is weird. We drove to a small Thai restaurant near my apartment, our usual spot, the one we'd been going to since our third date. Nothing had changed about our routine. That was the point. So, Ethan twirled his pad thai around his chopsticks. Now that you know about the hospitals, does anything change between us? I looked at him across the table. The same man who'd helped me stack chairs at a fundraiser, who'd never mentioned his net worth, who'd waited for me to discover the truth rather than using it to impress. You're still the guy who showed up in jeans to a black tie event, I said. The one who asks about my students by name. The one who listened to me complain about my father for 18 months without ever suggesting revenge. In my defense, the revenge kind of suggested itself. I smiled. That's who I fell for, not the CEO. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm, familiar. Good. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Because honestly, the CEO part is boring. Board meetings are the opposite of fun. I'll take your word for it. The chairs at your fundraiser were more exciting. At least those sometimes collapsed. I laughed until my sides hurt. This was us. This was enough. If you're watching this and you've ever been the disappointment in your family, the one whose choices were questioned, whose career was dismissed, whose worth was measured against someone else's achievements, I want you to know something. Your value isn't determined by their approval. It never was. I spent 28 years trying to earn my father's respect through achievement, trying to prove that my path was valid, waiting for the day he would look at me the way he looked at Vivian. That day never came. And here's what I finally understood. It didn't need to. My father may never fully appreciate what I do. He may always wish I'd followed the Martin tradition of medicine. He may spend the rest of his life subtly, or not so subtly, comparing me to my sister. That's his choice. But it's not my burden anymore. You don't need a millionaire boyfriend to prove your worth. You don't need a dramatic revelation at a country club to validate your existence. Those things happen to me, yes, but they're not the point. The point is this. I spoke my truth. I set my boundaries. I stopped waiting for permission to be myself. And that made all the difference. My relationship with my father is still complicated. It may always be, but complicated is honest, and honest is better than pretending. My mother and I talk every week now. Real conversations, not just small talk. Vivian is trying. I can see it in the small things. The texts that aren't competitive, the questions about my students that actually sound genuine. We're not best friends. Maybe we never will be. But we're sisters, learning how to be sisters again. And Ethan? He's still Ethan. Still stacking chairs at fundraisers, still making me laugh over Thai food, still choosing me for exactly who I am. That's my story, my simple life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Thank you for watching my story until the end. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to know, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if you want more stories like this, check the description for our latest videos. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, remember, your value isn't determined by others. Take care of yourself.